And so I'll let Susan introduce herself, and then Jennifer and Izzy, if you would follow up, that'd be great.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks especially to the Nevada Coalition Against the Death Penalty, Nancy. Let's see. My name is Susan Chandler, and I've taught for 25 years now at UNR in the School of Social Work. I've taught for the last 6 years at the Northern Nevada. I keep thinking Northern Nevada Cultural Center for some reason. It's the Northern Nevada Correctional Center, which is a medium security prison just south of Carson City.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. Izzy, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay. My name is Ismael Santillanes, AKA Izzy. I used to be Smiley before I went into prison. Then somebody changed it for me. I spent almost 29 years in prison, most of which were under the guidance of a very intelligent and compassionate human being by the name of Sean Griffin, who guided my hand in poetry, of all things. And it was something that eventually came to save my life, not necessarily physically, but the soul of my life. And now I have been on parole for the last 7.5 years, and I am almost finishing up on the first semester of a master's degree program in creative writing. So that's who I am.
And we are so glad to have both of you. And of course, one of the first people who I've known for a little bit longer now, Jennifer Garrison of Death Row Expressions. Oh, who's got a beautiful little pup there saying hello to everyone.
Hi, and again.
Yeah, so go ahead and please introduce yourself, Jennifer.
So hi, I'm Jennifer. I started Death Row Expressions, Inc. with William Leonard, who is incarcerated on Nevada's death row. When we started corresponding, he started sending me all his artwork, and our relationships kind of progressed from there. I offered to put all his art into a book, like a journal, like an art journal. And he liked the idea, and I completed that. And he said, hey, let's do this for other incarcerated individuals. And I said, okay, sounds like a good idea. And he basically was the foundation of this whole thing. And I followed his instruction and his direction on starting this nonprofit organization. And I almost feel like sometimes when he calls me, I'm like, oh, geez, it's my boss. so that's how we started it.
Awesome. And well, I'm looking forward, and I'm sure everyone else is today, to seeing a little bit more of Bill's artwork and hearing a little bit more of how that came to be and exactly what you all do. But I would love to turn it over to Susan to talk about some of the work that she has done here in Nevada, and she'll have it for the next 10 minutes. Or yeah, next 10, 15 minutes. Take it away.
Okay, thanks a lot, Mark. So in 2013, after 20 years of teaching at the University of Nevada, Reno, I retired. And as it turned out, I was not good at retirement. And when a friend suggested that I considered teaching in prison, I jumped at the opportunity. And in 2014, I began teaching 2 classes, creative writing and cultural perspectives, at NNCC. And in short order, that became one of the top teaching experiences of my life. So our creative writing classroom was comprised of comprised of about 12 to 15 men, and we met weekly in a beat up classroom in Unit 1. Izzy, you will be familiar with Unit 1. And because reading is key to writing, we began each class period with reading. Pablo Neruda, Maya Angelou, Du Bois, Jimmy Santiago Baca, and many, many more. Now, most of these authors were completely new to most of the men in the class, but the level of engagement with the writing was universally high, and I invariably compared it to my classes at the university favorably. During the second half of our time together, class members would read what they wrote, and either sometimes in a response to an assignment that I had crafted from the reading, and sometimes reading something that they were working on their own. So the writer would read his piece, and members of the class would respond. And I was continually struck by class members' ability to listen very closely to their classmates' writing. Many times they had heard things that I had not, and they offered comments with intelligence and great care. I wrote this little paragraph later about our class. Members of the class lack many things writers depend upon: access to a library of great books, use of the internet, word processors, desks, privacy, quiet, all of that completely absent in the prison. What they possessed, on the other hand, was formidable. In the classroom, I regularly found a hunger for knowledge, stimulation, and self-expression, decades of good and hard times from which to draw a poem or story, and a keen desire to connect with those on the outside. There was time, plenty of that, and a commitment to not waste it. Most important, there was the ability to reach down and put words on deep human emotions: love, despair, the realities of a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. So in time, we produced an annual journey, which we called Inside Insight. And Brandon, this is the point. Could you put up those couple of pictures? And I'll just talk about them. So this is the cover of the journal, Inside Insight. And it was drawn by a very, very important member of our class, Alex Wakeman, who is a Lakota man, and just sadly to us all, died a year ago. He wrote beautifully and was a wonderful artist and craftsperson as well. And then the second photo, Brandon. So this, hope you can see it. There are some men in the class. We're holding up a book that I love, The Sun Does Shine, by Anthony Ray Hinton, who spent 28 years on Alabama death row. Hinton suggested that we read that book out loud, and we did. It took us 10 weeks to get through it. I highly recommend it to anyone who is concerned with death, the death penalty, with race in our racism in our justice system, and wants to know about survival and humanity. Anyway, you can get a sense of this is just a portion of the class. So that's all, Brandon. Thanks a lot. So I want to tell you a story from the class, but before I do that, I want to step back and see if I can unwrap for a minute why art, writing, and poetry in prisons sometimes can be so powerful. So James Baldwin, who is a hero of mine and guide, wrote in 1961, "You read something which you thought only happened to you, and you discover that it happened 100 years ago to Dostoevsky. This is a very great liberation for the suffering, struggling person who always thinks he is alone." And that word alone is important. This is why art is important. Art would not be important if life were not important, and life is important. So art would not be important if life were not important, and life is important. That is a revolutionary statement in my mind for this reason. It's because we have been taught relentlessly that the lives of some people are not important at all. There are lives that matter less than other lives. There are people who do not possess a full measure of humanity. And among those lives that are not important are those on death row, and sometimes those sitting in our prison classrooms. Those thoughts are no accident, of course, and they're far more than personal. They have a long, long history, 400 years of it. I'm currently teaching a course, Mass Incarceration, Race, and Justice at the university. I begin it with a unit, Mass Incarceration, its roots in slavery, the genocide, and colonialism. That's a big story, but I can sum it up in one idea. For most of this country's history, it was not illegal to kill an African American, a Native American, or a Mexican. Not illegal. African Americans, Native Americans, and Mexicans in the white founders' eyes lacked the humanity to even be included under the country's laws. Instead, their lives were regulated by slave codes, lynch laws, and frontier vigilantism. It is easy, it is so easy as a historian to trace the origins of our manner of policing, of the death penalty, and of our propensity to lock up way too many people to those early roots. So James Baldwin's words, and life is important, that on the one hand, and the persistent reality that some lives are not important are interlaced through and through with what I call white supremacy. That's my opinion, and I don't even think it's controversial. So now let's return to our subject, art in prison. Bo Brown, a member of our class, in the preface, in one of the prefaces to our journal, described what the poet or artist in prison faces. This is a quote. Here in prison, one is forced to touch the center of his own sorrows, where he is either opened by life's betrayals or closed from fear of further pain. Harnessing this sensation in a creative way is the goal of our class. I hope that this collection will challenge readers to ask themselves if they can stand in the center of the fire and not shrink back, to ask themselves what really sustains them from the inside when all else falls away, unquote. So Bo is saying in part that art has something to do with survival. What do you need to survive? Well, we can turn that question on its head and ask, what do they use to break you? And a big answer to that is isolation, aloneness, feeling that no one cares, that no one hears, and if they do hear, that they do not accept your story. Art is the reaching out of the soul, not into thin air, but to other souls. On the one hand, it takes tremendous courage on the part of the person in prison to do that. On the other hand, for the person outside, it also requires courage and more a belief, as Mother Teresa would say it, that we belong to each other, that no distance separates us. So let me return to that story that I wanted to tell you. from our creative writing class. So Joseph was a student in that creative writing class. And he had requested that we read Emerson, the Transcendentalist. Now, Joseph is white, he is tattooed, he's born again, and he is a Marine veteran. He is a little intimidating, even in a wheelchair. At 73, he's serving a sentence with of life without the possibility of parole. You might be surprised that Joseph reads Shakespeare and the Greek classics avidly and is a big fan of the Transcendentalists, hence Emerson. So we begin the class with Joseph's creditable overview of Transcendentalism, and we read On Nature aloud. And the men, as always, the class as always is fully engaged. Mid-discussion, another student, Mohammed, breaks in with the comment that Transcendentalism sounds a lot like Sufism. Mohammed is an African-American man who has been a practicing Muslim for 35 years. He reads the Quran daily and can recite long passages in Arabic. Joseph assures him that there is nothing of Islam in Transcendentalism, and we go on with the discussion. I, however, am intrigued, and when I get home, I Google Transcendentalism and Islam and discover that it is a whole field. And there are books and scholarly articles in abundance in it. Amazingly, especially amazingly, Emerson himself considered the 13th century Sufi poet Hafiz a principal muse. So I copy a couple of the articles and take them to class the next week with a request that Joseph and Mohammed lead a further discussion the following week. And I bring along a poem by Hafiz, which everyone loves. It's not difficult to love Hafiz. So now you get a picture of the classroom. So the air is electric and everybody is grinning, save perhaps for Joseph, who is not sure he appreciates a Sufi mystic being associated with Transcendentalism. But he came around eventually. And somehow we instinctively get the import of this completely unexpected connection between worlds. 13th century Persia, 19th century New England, and 21st century Nevada prison. All of it happening not in some high scholarly place, but in a crummy prison classroom. It's an affirmation, and it's so clear. It's an affirmation, it's an affirmation of the men's intellect and hearts, and therein my connection with each other and with Hafiz and Emerson. So do you see what happened in this forbidden connection? For of course, these are lives, including mine, really, that don't matter. Can you see what poetry, the men's lives and their own deep suffering, and critically our collective humanity, were able to produce? It's why in prison art and poetry that tiny revolutions sometimes occur. And it's how race hatred, that bulwark of our too cruel world, is sometimes defeated. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that and sharing those stories. I can only imagine that everyone has had their fair share of tears and laughter, but thank goodness we've all been muted. Thank you, Susan. Now I'm gonna go ahead and mix things up a little bit and ask Jennifer if she wouldn't mind going second, and I'll have Izzy close out our presentations before we lead into discussion, as I know now he's gonna be reading some poetry for us, so hopefully that can maybe kick off our discussion and lead into it. So if Jennifer, you wouldn't mind stepping up to bat right now a little bit early and popping your PowerPoint presentation up and telling us a little bit more about how Death Row Expression has done a lot of similar work that Susan has talked about, although through sort of a different lens. And without further ado, I'll sort of let you take it away.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so Death Row Expressions Inc. was developed as a collaboration between myself and Nevada Death Row human, William Leonard. So he prefers the term human. So I apologize if I revert back to inmate. But just recently I spoke to him and he said, I prefer in the presentation if you refer to me as human, not inmate. So we'll do that. Our correspondence began in 2019. I'm a therapist and I have a PhD in human behavior. And when I started communicating with him, I noticed he was very motivated, very diligent. He definitely was not what I expected. He had all these ideas, business ideas. He immediately started sending me his artwork. I would get sometimes 2 or 3 pieces of artwork a day. And I finally said to him, I'm not really sure what you want me to do with all your art. Sometimes he wanted me to send it elsewhere. Sometimes he wanted me to keep it. So, I said, well, how about we put it all in a book and I can go through Amazon self-publishing and I can do like an art journal for you. And he said, okay, yeah, let's do that. So I did that and he liked the idea. He got his author's copy and he said, this is really cool. Maybe we can do this for other people. We'll like start a business. I said, okay, yeah, we can do that. And then his idea was actually for profit, which I thought was really interesting. He wanted me to charge incarcerated folks for self-publishing. And I thought, well, I don't feel comfortable doing that as a therapist. I don't really feel that's very therapeutic, but good idea. So I decided to make it a nonprofit. And then the other incarcerated folks that I was communicating with, I presented the idea to them. A lot of them really liked it. They started sending me poems and artwork in preparation to, have me put a book together for them. And then unfortunately, we started running into a lot of barriers. So these are some of the books that I started with some of the folks on death row. So Williams are at the top. He did his art book, and then Breeding Monsters came next. And that's a journal of trauma, torture, and transformation. And it's pretty extensive. It actually is a compilation of his first book, which was Filling the Void, with her name is Maggie Smart from the UK. And then he included some things in that about his experiences with guards while incarcerated. And then his transformation through therapeutic intervention. It's 570 pages. It's pretty big. It's available on Amazon now. And when I sent him his author's copy, it was actually withheld from him. And it was considered a threat to security or something of that nature. So that leads us to some of the barriers here that we're getting into. So fear of consequences, that is a big barrier I ran into with doing this, with helping the incarcerated have a voice in the community. Things can happen such as removal of privileges, removal of the tools necessary for continued engagement, fear of vulnerability. That's actually something I've heard from some of them, is they were afraid guards would read their poetry. They were afraid peers would get a hold of some of the things they were saying and they would become a target. That kind of brings me circling back around to Bill's artwork. When he started sending me his first set of artwork for his first book, a lot of it was very graphic in nature. There are a lot of things in the artwork that might possibly offend some individuals. And I mentioned this to him and I thought, well, maybe we should put a warning at the beginning. And he said, well, shit, take it all out. And I said, no, I don't really think that's, a good idea. People kind of need to see this transformation. I noticed around 2001, his artwork got really dark. So you could see he was kind of going through something. And I think it's very important for people to see the transformation in its whole. So I went ahead and I put that warning in there. Fear of further incrimination, that's something else that's come up. And then, of course, the Son of Sam laws, which vary from state to state. And I've corresponded with David Berkowitz regarding these, since the laws are named after him. And he mentioned to me how different states have different rules in regards to Son of Sam laws. Some of them are allowed to engage in publication. They're allowed, income up to a certain amount. Some states, don't allow it. Profits have to go to victims' families. So there's a lot of different rules, and it's important, I think, for each individual to know what those rules entail based on the state they're incarcerated in. And why is some of this important? Because studies have shown the ability to engage in artistic expression promotes internal growth, human connection, empathy, and greater respect and cohesiveness. So basically, by allowing incarcerated individuals to engage in, therapeutic activities such as art and poetry and some form of expression, it allows them to transform and grow. Real quick, this isn't in the slideshow, but I also have Billy Castillo, who is in Nevada as well, and I correspond with him. And he actually he ate his last meal. He was all set to be executed a couple of years ago. Said all his goodbyes. He was all set for execution, and that was retracted. And he told me he was heated when that happened. He said he was very, very upset. He was ready to die, and he wanted to have it done. And now, looking back, he said that is one thing he's glad that he had, is that time to process and grow and learn and, meet people that can help him transform and grow spiritually. So that's important. He has some artwork as well that I may be putting into a book form with him, as well as a journal. So drawing and painting can be acts of personal expression for, I don't like the term prisoners, but this is a quote, prisoners awaiting execution. Inmates facing the death penalty, art offers a way to define their own identity and assert their existence to an audience far beyond the confines of their cell. So it gives them an opportunity to be heard outside of the walls of the prison. So again, this circles back around to William Leonard and the books that he has done. And this is actually a quote from Mr. Leonard from Filling the Void, which is also in Breeding Monsters. And it explains why expression was so important to him, writing and engaging in some form of artistic expression. So soon after I put pen to paper, drafting my life story, I felt the dragon in me awaken once again, enabling me to shrug off the despair and fight back the effects of the venom. I also felt the love and support of my friends. I think even if no one outside my circle of friends reads this book about my life, I'm convinced that the process of writing it has kept me alive and others out of harm's way. This is a good thing and a healthy thing that is flourishing in a terrible and an unhealthy environment. And here's some of his artwork. A lot of these pieces I've actually made products with on Teespring. So there's mugs and canvas art, t-shirts and socks and tote bags, things like that. I've used some of his artwork for. One of my favorite is the dozen dragons on the right side there. Took him 90 hours to create. And again, limited tools as well. So he often just has access to pens and pencils and so forth. Okay, so Donald Banks, he did the quintessential eloquence of Donald Banks, which is poetry. And here are some of his quotes, which I also have on t-shirts, mugs, and other things. And any products or any books purchased, all the money, any donations through the GoFundMe, this all goes back to them. And without that, I support them independently on my own. And I work full time, so I just use that money to help them out with art supplies they need to continue creating. And one of my favorites from him is coming from the isolated, we reach for the invisible, soaked in the oppression of opposition. And as the darkness becomes my reality, as I am to embrace it with a voice. And then Brandy Jennings or Brand Jennings from Florida. Some of his poetry is here. Touchings within, knocking, going unanswered, deaf, it speaks in fiery breath, blind it writes in the blood of innocence, tears spawning with fear of truth, shaken to perceive its unrealities, where life is ending with tongues of deceit. So in his case, actually, prior to reaching death row, he was never incarcerated. So his first experience as an incarcerated individual was on death row. John has the Grimoire, which was his first book, and this is what we were actually working on when he got COVID and writer's block. Vampire stories. So he does vampire stories for me. And then Richard Shear. He was worried, actually, he mentioned to me that he was worried his engagement in this program would be deemed illegal for him. And this is one of his recipes. So it's actually going to be in the book, our cookbook, when we're done. So if anyone wants to jot down this recipe and try it out. Then we have Daryl Stinsky. And here is a page from his journal. And then Michael Nance. Michael Nance actually just was recently in the media. I guess he requested the firing squad for his execution. So, so yeah, there's some information online about that. And here's some of his artwork. And then that is it for the presentation. And then we also have an Instagram. We have a Facebook. Facebook has, links to Teespring, if you want to buy any products. And then our website, Death Row Expressions Inc. If you just put that in Google, it'll take you right to the website. And there's a link to the GoFundMe as well as Amazon. And our Instagram.
And for anyone who wants to check it out, I did put William's book, the Amazon link, in the chat box, as well as the Death Row Expressions, their Teespring, where you can sort of purchase things, and you can also plug into their variety of other social medias and so on. Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing and sharing those stories. Definitely a lot of that art has really struck me. And
thank you for that. I forgot to unmute myself. I was saying that my heart rate is elevated. My Jennifer's presentation just brought so many memories, and I was back in my cell doing artwork and writing poetry, and it is at times it is a painful thing to remember. Anyways. What poetry and artwork did for me was to evoke something outside of my cell, outside of my body, outside of my cell, outside of the prison. And when people talk about how artwork allows an inmate or a prisoner or whatever they want to call themselves, I personally prefer prisoner when I was in there for philosophical reasons, and I'll discuss that in just a little bit. But when I was in there, artwork allowed me to escape. I was not anymore in my cell, and it is so important to do that because it doesn't matter what you do. For instance, as a job, if you are an executive in a company, if you are the guy who cleans toilets on a golf course, it doesn't matter what you do. Occasionally, you really do need a break from that. And artwork in prison allowed that break. In prison, I believe every prisoner's job is to be a prisoner. That's our job. The side jobs are those things that we do when we get up and go work in the kitchen or work in the laundry or go rake rocks or whatever they have us doing. That's the side job. Our real job is to be a prisoner. So I digress a lot, so excuse me for that. um, Mark was talking about a poem or a conversation we had that spurred on a poem, and it is something that is fighting me at this moment. I can't get through, um, and I think the reason is because I just can't see myself going back to prison, and my soul is fighting me, and my intellect is trying to get through it. So they're having this conversation inside my heart, inside my body, and eventually it's something will be worked out. It's not a Republican and Democratic conversation. It's just a soul, and it's just my soul and my intellect talking inside my body, and they always work things out. So let me share what I do have, and it gives you a sense of how I think about poetry. Um, so let me just read this. It's called The Fish Tank. It's in parts. Part 1, the day after I was sentenced. Pieces of my body were packed into an orange jumpsuit, complete with belly chains and leg irons. Others were also put into orange jumpsuits, all of us missing parts. At 2 o'clock in the morning, no one saw us loaded into a van where we sat and had to accustom our knees to touching. We drifted out of each other's sights into our own minds. I cleared a space in my head where I sat with shame burning like oil in my hands. For 8 hours, we rode like obedient spirits. The muffled voices of the 2 guards in the front seats made me wonder if hell would be like this, not able to understand what another soul was saying. Part 2, Nevada State Prison construction, 1862. Did men quarry sandstone, or did earth grow us to chisel desolation into walls? Did stonecutters sledge prayer into blocks, or did the walls learn language from me? Did graphite etch the sound of what was not written in letters home, the analog of soft tissue pleading? Part 3. From the transport van to a heavy hinged metal door, each step tore a piece of heart like bread, each hobble a font without a word, lungs breathing out the dust of a soul. Like an innervated cavity, I walked in empty. So far, that's where I am uh, with this poem. And it's a difficult thing to get through because even though I say at the end I walked in, there's this, the next part is going to be talking about how they handled and processed this body, and eventually went into the fish tank. And there's something I want to talk to. The conversation Mark and I had that spurred this poem was a conversation about someone whose nickname was Killer. When I was in the fish tank, I sat there. It was dark. It was no coloring, cement walls, cement floor, a metal bed. And at night, I would listen to someone singing blues music with a guitar, and sometimes I would hear a harmonica. And all that did was to feed the meme or the idea of what prison was going to be like if I ever ended up in prison. Not that I ever thought that I would end up in prison. Most people don't think ever end up in prison. So I would listen to this person sing, this black man's voice, a very rich, thick voice, and it would put me to sleep, which is something that really doesn't happen. I cannot sleep if I hear a cricket outside the window. I really can. So any sound will wake me up. But to this melodic, very human voice, I would fall asleep. And it was after the fish tank. I went through some things. Years later, I was in another prison, and I became a member of a group, a musical group, rock and roll, old classic rock. And I would walk into the music room, and I would sit in a corner, and I would just sit there and listen to other groups, whoever was there. It didn't matter. I just loved music. And one day I went in, and I knelt down in my corner, and I hear someone playing an acoustic guitar, and I hear this voice, and I say to myself, I've heard that voice. Now this is years later, so I couldn't remember where I heard it, but I heard it before. And I walked up to this black man with a barrel chest and a friendly face, and I said, I've heard you before. Where have I heard you before? And he said, I don't know. And I said, and I introduced myself. Hey, my name's Smiley. At that time, it was Smiley. Then somebody changed it to Izzy for me, and it doesn't matter. That's just a nickname. And he introduced himself as Killer. Never knew his real name. It didn't matter. That's who he was to me. This is Killer, and he plays the guitar, and he plays this beautiful blues music, and he has a beautiful voice to go with it. So that was plenty. You learn not to ask questions in prison, so that was enough for me. I enjoyed his company. While we were standing there, I was trying to figure out where I had heard him, and he goes, "Well, have you been here?" "No, I haven't." He goes, "Okay, well, have you been here?" "No, I haven't." He goes, "Well, when did you fall?" Now, to fall is to go to prison. So part of the prison 101 linguistic class is to fall is to go to prison. So he asked me, when did you fall? And I told him when, and he goes, "Well, when were you in the fish tank?" And I told him, and he said, that there was a wall, the length of that wing. A wing is an area that has a bunch of cells, and that's a wing. So that wing, he says, was divided by a wall, and on one side of that wall is the fish tank. He says, and on the other side of that wall is death row. And he says, I was on death row. So when I went into prison as a fish, I had the honor of listening to a man on death row singing every night. And we laughed at that situation. And I was so glad that we were able, now in retrospect, I'm so glad that we were able to laugh at that situation, because he was not on death row anymore. Things happened with legislation, politics, whatever, that got him off of death row. So that is where this poem needs to go. And my soul it wants no part of going back to prison. I guess it just doesn't understand that all it is just a bunch of words on lines that create what we call poems. It just doesn't want to go there. So that's where I'm at now. I wanted to address, if I can find my notes, a couple of things. And I can't remember what spurred on my notes, but it was during Jennifer's and Susan's presentation. When I joined up a creative writing program. It was a program conducted by Sean Griffin, who is just one of the most compassionate human beings I've ever met on this planet. And we were there. After a few years, he came in and he says, "Look, some have asked that we should give out certificates for attending the workshop." The workshop we ended up calling Razor Wire, the Razor Wire workshop, and it's still in effect. It's still active. And when we talked about it, and my opinion, which was the opinion of others, was that if we added a certificate or whatever, good time, work time, whatever it is that you can add to as payment for attending a poetry workshop, my concern was that if we did that, people would be coming to the workshop not because they wanted poetry or to learn poetry, but because they wanted that certificate so that they can present to the parole board so that they can get out. Not that I don't think that a certificate from a poetry workshop at that time, I don't know now because I've been out for a while, but at that time, I don't think that a certificate from a poetry workshop would move any of the members of the parole board. But that was my concern. My concern was that they would be coming for the certificate and not to engage poetry. So eventually we didn't do the certificate. The other thing I wanted to say was that I sort of paraphrased something that Susan had said about someone was asked to touch the center of our sorrows. My question, since I've been talking to Mark and since I've been engaged in this conversation, this internal conversation about the death penalty, is still a very real question for me. What goes through a prisoner's mind facing the death penalty? When Jennifer talked about her friend who was about to be executed, and then they, postpone it or whatever they did, and he wasn't executed, and he was upset about that. It is such a traumatic thing to me. When I heard that, I was like, oh shit, I'm about to lose it here. That is such a horrible thing to me, because the mind is where most prisoners live. We live up here, and in our hearts, we feel things, and up here we try to intellectualize what we're feeling. Ergo poetry, right, and artwork. So those are very very personal ideas.
And Izzy, if you wouldn't mind me stepping in, I think that's a great place for us to open up the conversation for all the panelists, since we're at about 25 till. Susan and Jennifer, if you both would like to pop your videos back on and join Izzy, and we can sort of pick up there.
Oh, before we wrap it up too, I just wanted to briefly introduce my friend Ahmad, who spent 20 some years on Ohio's death row. Is he here?
Yeah, Ahmad is here, and he's joined us for this discussion. We're very eager to have him, and the coalition will be following up and talking to him. So you may, all of you may get a chance to get to know him a little better in coming weeks. And right now, with a national partner, Death Penalty Action, they're working with him to host a GoFundMe. And you can learn a little bit about that. There's a link that Brandon just posted in the chat. But I wanted to open it up and see, number one, if we have any questions from the group. This is now, please start popping those in the chat box. And I guess my first question I just want to direct to everyone. What was your first interaction with art from someone who had been or was incarcerated? And what struck you the most about that? And how did that set you on this journey to be doing the things that you're working on now?
Actually, well, I had been writing to incarcerated folks for years, back 10 years back, but this all just started, the whole art thing. It was with William in 2019, so just last year. He was the first incarcerated individual to just start saying, "Here's all my art." And so that was my first encounter with art from someone incarcerated. There are a lot of benefits for those who are incarcerated. Incarcerated individuals who engage in art and therapeutic activities, it tends to reduce violent tendencies and behaviors. So overall, it creates a more, I guess you would say, harmonious environment, I guess, if you could say that about being incarcerated. That doesn't just benefit those who are incarcerated, it benefits, I think, the prison system as a whole. You know, the guards are maybe not going to be as defensive, or, you know, if it could just, you know, reduce, and it does, it just reduces violent tendencies, having a more therapeutic environment for incarcerated folks. So that's definitely one of the benefits of having art, giving them the opportunity to engage in art and therapeutic expression, gives them an outlet.
Thank you.
Positive outlet.
Thank you. And Susan and Izzy, I'll give you both a chance to respond as well. And then we do have a question from Yesenia in the audience.
I actually don't have much of a response. One of my dearest friends, Cassandra Little, was incarcerated and in the federal system, and she writes often about, you know, that art and writing was what, and reading was what helped her survive. So.
And Izzy, we have a question here from Yesenia. Did you feel barriers when you were releasing your poetry and when you were writing?
My manuscript, I have a book, in Delicate Angels. The manuscript was was created, and I handed it over to my mentor, Sean, and we tried for about 15 years to get that published. I was somewhat against it simply because he was bringing in poets, you know, in Xerox poets, and I would compare my poetry to their work, and it was a very difficult thing for me to accept that I was anywhere close to being publishable. So that was one of the barriers. It was my own thinking. The other thing was simply being in prison. How do you sell yourself in a free world? I didn't want to self-publish, and I did not want to be published by someone who published poetry by prisoners generally. I wanted, if I was going to write and be published, I wanted to be published by someone who accepted poetry, my poetry, because I was good enough as a poet, not because they were having. It seemed like they were having. That idea would be to me like they were having pity on me, and I didn't want that. Most prisoners just don't like that. They don't have pity on us. So those were a couple of the barriers.
Thank you, Izzy. I have another question here from Tashina. She is aware of racial divides in classes with other. Was there backlash from the group or people you hung out with?
A backlash like okay, so one of the things that happened when I first went into prison was that someone handed me a shank, a piece of metal with a bunch of tape around it, and he, the leader of this Mexican group, wanted me to go stab somebody. Now I'm fresh on the yard, didn't know anything about being in prison. I did know one thing though. I knew that my name was the only one called when the judge slammed his little hammer down, the gavel down. And I told him so, and I said, so if you have any problems with that person, you go stab him. And so that sort of separated me from the Mexican group. I was sort of a loner. And so as a loner, if you get backlash, it isn't in a poetry group or attending a poetry group, or it actually becomes backlash from your own the members of the poetry group. What the hell are you writing? You know, the critique. So that's the only real backlash I ever had from writing poetry or doing artwork. Artwork is accepted. It's like, you know, a manly thing, you know, yeah, let's do artwork. Hey, do a portrait for me. And you do the portrait and you get paid in top ramens or stamps. And, but poetry, even though it is sometimes seen as something, and I apologize if I offend people, but even though it is sometimes seen as effeminate, when you let them know that, hey, look, there's this book and I have a poem in it, it's almost like you're telling them, hey, I have a book, I have a poem in this and you don't. Why? Because I'm good enough to be in this book. And even though it's a prison book, you know, it's a book published through Sean's efforts. And so not really, I really didn't have any backlash. The poetry group that I was in, we had all races in it at any point. I don't know what it's like now. I keep saying that. I've been out of prison for 7.5 years, more than that, but it's not 8 yet. And so for 7.5 years I've been out. So I don't know what the climate is now. But when I was there, we had all races involved in it. Anybody who wanted to learn about poetry, goes back to the argument of not having certificates issued out for attending these classes.
And Izzy, we have a follow-up question on that very subject. What made you join the poetry workshop in the first place? Were you familiar with poetry at that point?
Let me read something. It'll only take about a minute. it's called I Blame Sean, and it isn't. It's just part of some memoir stuff that I'm writing, but this sort of clarifies it. For the first 5 years in prison, nothing more closely describes my life as this: I existed. Nothing more. Then I met Gary, incarcerated by then for many years. One day, out for a walk around the prison yard, he pointed out someone whose eyes were lifeless. He pointed out the head tilt, the bugler stained fingers, the endemic lifer's coffee mug, how he moved past others without being noticed. As far as Gary could determine, our subject was walking around without a soul. Then Gary predicted quite honestly, if you don't change, you'll end up like that. There has never been no stronger a catharsis for me to change. Soon I landed a job as a college clerk. Within this college program, I met Sean, and that's when I joined the poetry class. That thought of walking around a life, just a body without a soul, was horrifying to me. I don't know why. Maybe because of my Catholicism when I was brought up Catholic. Since then, I'm a Catholic butt. As my sister is a Jehovah's Witness, but we have, and that but is like, yeah, I'm a Jehovah's Witness, but or I'm a Catholic, but I have all these other ideas about spirituality. So, so that is what pushed me into this environment where I was able to meet Sean and eventually join into his class. At first, it was a 300 and 400 level college class from UNR, and after that, we couldn't find the people to support the class, so he made it into a workshop, and it didn't matter if we had 2 people show up; it was still a workshop.
Thank you, Izzy. And thank you, Izzy. And we are at 6:19, so I wanted to close it on this last question for all 3 of the panelists, and I love it if you all could answer this individually. Could you discuss how art, poetry, art in its many forms, has helped you think about the importance and the role of dignity, especially as it applies to folks who are experiencing incarceration and folks who are experiencing the extreme isolation of death row?
Well, I can start. I think art and literary expression in terms of dignity, it gives these individuals an opportunity to hopefully be heard, and to express themselves, because it's what anyone really wants, right? Is to be heard, to be able to express themselves freely, without judgment, harassment, persecution, whatever that might be. It gives them an opportunity to be heard and hopefully understood. And, as William said, if only one person reads his book, or even if nobody reads his book, engaging in that act of expression gives him back that sense of dignity. And that's what really matters, is being able to get back that sense of dignity and self-worth and value and purpose,
Thank you, Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
I could read a poem. It's called LWOP. I guess it's not a poem so much as a statement, life without the possibility of parole. This is written by a young man who at 19 was sentenced with that. LWOP means denial of hope. It means that good behavior and character improvements are immaterial. It means that whatever the future holds in store for the mind and spirit of that person, he will remain in prison for the rest of his days. Sentencing someone to life without parole is saying you personally render that person permanently unregenerate. and an unredeemable danger to society, who must be caged until he dies. Life without the possibility of parole is death by incarceration, execution without the judicial mandate of counsel. So I think that for that young man who I met when he was 35 and had been in prison for 16 years, writing and using his kind of formidable brain was a way of saying, I'm not that, what you say I am. And he has become a very much a force on the yard, and has not given up hope that he might get out. And yeah.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for sharing. And Izzy, if you'd round us out with your comments here.
Dignity is one of those concepts and those words that I sometimes tiptoe around, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just slap myself in the face and say, you know what, that dignity is being a human being. And as much as there are separations within our society, the one thing that holds us as a species together is that one word, is humanity.
Mm-hmm.
And within that word is nestled all these other concepts: dignity, respect, simply walking out into my own community and meeting or greeting someone, look at them in the eyes and allow them to understand, even if it's for just a microsecond, that I recognize your humanity, is a contribution to dignity. It is something that I struggle with within my own body, because at times I go back to being that person who went into the fish tank and had absolutely no regard as to what happened to me. I was my worst judge at that point, and had no sense of dignity pouring out, no sense of respect for myself, no sense of humanity. And it awakened. Luckily, it awakened. But dignity is one of those things that I tiptoe around, or it's just like a strong cup of coffee that wakes me up and says, you know, it's within you to treat others with humanity, and that to me, that says it all. Just the treatment of others, the respect to how they think and what they're going through. Being in prison is very mental. It eats at you in your own head. It eats at you in your own heart, and you lose. And what it eats at is your sense of self, your sense of self-respect, your sense of dignity. It eats at those things to the point where you become a shell, or simply someone who just doesn't care.
And thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you to everyone who has stuck with us for the last hour and a half. I hope that this has been illuminating and elucidating. And I hope that everyone has a lot of resources and reading material and things to go and dive into after this conversation. And of course, I do want to sort of, as we close this out, if anyone does have any questions, myself and Brandon will be staying online for a couple more minutes, and some of our speakers may be popping out. But if you have any other sort of follow-up questions, feel free to stick around. But that will be sort of the end of the formal programming. And I also want to remind you all to please, if you haven't already, please join the Nevada Coalition Against the Death Penalty. There are a couple of links that Brandon, our organizer, has popped in the chat box over there to sign a petition, fill out a volunteer interest form. We have a lot of different projects going on right now that we could use a ton of help on. And of course, make sure you go and check out Death Row Expressions and go to that website to purchase some of that artwork and give those proceeds back to the folks who are on death row and experiencing this extreme isolation. And we will also be sending around a recording of this to everyone, and some of the links that we put in this chat box to everyone who has attended. So if you missed them, we'll make sure you get them on the back end. But again, thank you everyone. And I don't know how you do a round of applause on Zoom, but a round of applause to our speakers. They were fantastic, and I'm so grateful for all of them.